80% of Gen Z and millennials say women supporting women is a key economic trend fueling today's economy. But we also see 74% of Gen Z and millennials are interested in more experiences that are centered around women's interests, outlooks, and communities. So sports, what the Olympics is going to look like this summer, and just that intentionality about how women create experiences that are inclusive, that feel great.
Welcome back to the show. We are bringing you, as promised, part number 2 of my conversation with Libby Rodney, the Chief Strategy Officer at Harris Poll. Of course, Harris Poll does a ton of polling. If you've heard them mentioned in the news, they are frequently quoted in media. And Libby came on last week, episode 181, and part 1 of my conversation. So if you have not heard that, please feel free to go back and listen to it. But Libby helped me make sense of the results from our recent SheSpeaks surveys, where we ask women what's on their mind. What we talk about in this week's episode, part 2, is we talk about what some of the perceptions are of the upcoming elections and why people vote or say that they're going to vote the way they are. We talk about why people have interests for different candidates. And we also talk about the generational impact of politics and how different generations, whether that's the boomers or the Gen X or the millennials or Gen Z, how they are thinking about politics and voting. And then we talk about some hopeful trends. So this conversation was terrific. It has a lot of really great insight. I love how Libby is able to take the data from these surveys and break it down in a way that makes me and other people understand why people are saying what they're saying and what does it really mean. So with that, I'm going to let you hear part 2 of my conversation with Libby Rodney. Here we go. One of the other elements that we heard about in our most recent survey, we wanted to understand from people what was going to affect their vote in the upcoming presidential election. And so we gave them a variety of factors. When we do our research, the economy is always the number one factor. They're like how they think the economy is doing, which based on our conversation just now, a lot of people don't think it's doing great. Healthcare, access and affordability of healthcare is number 2. Number 3 on the list is women's reproductive rights. And, after the overturn of Roe v. Wade, we started trying to understand, like, how much is this really going to impact women's vote, right? Because we know that, frequently women are not necessarily voting only with their own interests, right? They vote they think about their families, they think about the broader picture. They're not necessarily always just thinking about their own interest. But we thought, oh, wow, Roe v. Wade and this overturn impacts not just women, but their children. So it has popped in our latest survey. And we've been seeing this since the overturn, that women are saying this is an issue, but it's still third to the economy and health and affordability and availability of healthcare. So I'm curious to get your perspective on what drives that? How do you read this insight that even though this is a big issue for them, there are still other issues that override?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And I think about it as it folds in. So when I think about reproductive rights, there's an intersection between economic stability and there's an intersection between healthcare access. And I think what is a dominant narrative, whether it always has to be this way or not, is if you have economic security and stability, you might not be able to change the politics of your region or your state, but you can at least access the reproduction rights you need. If your healthcare is taken care of and you have, access to great quality healthcare, you can also hopefully access those reproductive rights. So to me, it's like a trifecta. And the thing that I think what you're seeing with what women are saying or what respondents are saying are important is that they're basically at those basic Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is where is my home, shelter, security, safety? So how am I going to have some economic stability in my life? And how am I going to access healthcare, which is, a huge issue in America where most people are facing some sort of healthcare issue or problem that feels very real to them. And it's as important. I mean, it's close to being as important as reproductive rights, but it's just a little notch above that.
And that's actually what we saw in the survey. One other statistic that I wanted to talk about, also,
Sure.
well, related to the voting, we just talked about what women say will impact their vote, is who they will vote for. So we found so when we did the survey in April, which was our Q2 survey, we found that there were more women who thought, and we didn't say, who are you going to vote for? We said, who do you think will win? And we were not asking outright, who are you voting for, but who do you think is going to win? And we wanted to kind of take the emotion of their own vote out of it to just get
that's smart
perception of who they think will win. So in the April survey, we found that more women thought that President Biden was going to win. So it looks like in April, we had 43% of women who thought that President Biden would win. We had 40% of women who thought that former President Trump would win. And then we had about 17% who just said, I think it's going to be someone else. I guess they're very optimistic. They're thinking
third
about
party system.
Somebody's going to come out of left field. So that was the April stat. When we asked the same question, just about 4 to 6 weeks later in May, late May, the numbers were different. Now, former President Trump is in the lead, according to women's perceptions of who's going to win. 44% of women said they thought that Donald Trump would win. 42% said Joe Biden, and 14% said others. So basically, some people are getting more realistic that maybe others shouldn't be as large as it was in April at 17%. Now it's 14%, and former President Trump is now, from their perception, in the lead. I guess I'm curious. It's a 6-week difference, a 4 to 6 week difference in these numbers. Can the media, what you see on media, like what drives a change like that in surveying of everyday people? Have you seen that type of thing in the past?
Yeah, I mean, it can be this feeling of fear or shifting. I mean, numbers can actually, when it comes to elections, can really dramatically jump around because people are dealing with emotions of fear, or they're starting to get more honest, or to your point, the third party kind of shifts to the side and people start getting realistic. And so those numbers and the shifts don't surprise me. But I definitely feel like fear is on the national agenda right now on kind of what's happening. I would say in our recent work, we found that, to talk about the third party point of view, we found that 71% of Americans, so majorities of Americans, said they would vote for a third party if their views were relatively close and they stress optimism and unity instead of division. So I think this idea that and we found another stat that said this is kind of a crazy one and it's not going to be possible, but it's interesting to see Americans vote for this. 78% of Americans said the 2024 election is an opportunity for Americans to unify instead of divide. Meanwhile, everything that's coming out of the political market feels very divisive. And so what you see and what we have been noticing in our research is just this like big purple kind of coming. And what we mean by that is there's a lot more consensus that is happening in the middle, and people are looking for candidates that bring people together, that can be conveners, that can be consensus builders, and can really stress optimism and unity, which we do not see right now in the political market. So I think we're probably going to keep seeing those ups and downs between, do you perceive Biden or Trump to win? And that will just be dependent on the ways in which they interpret others to act in probably response to fear.
Yeah. Well, fear is such a big factor for people, right? I'm curious, it's interesting because we also ask people if they felt like if they had the option, would they
Mm-hmm.
swap out candidates? And
Mm-hmm.
we had 55% of women who'd said that they would replace both Donald Trump and Joe Biden
Mm-hmm.
if they could. We had another 16% who said that they would replace just Donald Trump. And then 20% who said that they would replace just Joe Biden. And then 9% who said that they would keep them both. So, it's such an interesting, if you look at that, then, we did a little bit of math there. Obviously, 74% of people want to replace Joe Biden as a candidate, and 71% of people want to replace
Mm-hmm.
Donald Trump with a different
Yeah.
candidate. So it's so interesting that, to your point, when you said that people think that I don't remember what the number was, the percentage, but that they think that the 2024 election is an opportunity to unify.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how people are that optimistic, maybe potentially optimistic if such a strong percentage of them, three quarters or almost three quarters want to
Yeah.
replace President Biden with a different candidate, and 71% want to replace the other, major party candidate with another candidate.
Yeah. I think it's like a Hail Mary in some attempts, right? It's like, man, there has been so much anticipatory dread that you can see in the research that you just talked about of going into this election with two candidates that people are not excited about. Frankly, from what you're seeing in your report, we see the very similar thing. We've seen it from January where people were like, I don't want either of these candidates. And we saw last fall, we asked young people about this, and Gen Z and millennials, so everyone under 42 is saying it's time for older leaders to step aside and give younger leaders a chance. And I think we started asking that because it's not that it needs to be Gen Z or millennial, but even, right, who typically are in that age range of presidency, Gen X has a different perspective and a different value set. And really, if things were going in a normal presidential cycle, you would see that kind of Gen X or young boomer, at least value set be placed at the forefront. So I think those things are just really challenging to navigate.
Yeah. And, it's interesting because now that you're talking about the generational element, I was just thinking that President Biden is not even a boomer, right?
No,
He's
he's a
like the
silent
generation
generation.
above boomers, the
Mhm.
silent generation, right? I think
Yes.
that's what they're
Yeah.
called. And I don't even know if President Trump or former President Trump
Right.
is a boomer. I think he might also be kind of in that silent generation. And it's so interesting to your point that we couldn't, like, from people's perceptions
Right.
are like, why can't we come up with a candidate that is a boomer, a Gen Xer, like a little bit
Right.
more in line with the age? Well, I think it's
Right.
what 50 you have. Is it 45 or 50 to be able to run for president? You have to
Yeah.
be,
Yep.
yeah,
You have to be 45, I think. But
yeah.
the other thing is, so what's interesting, what we're watching or I'm super interested in is you have generational researchers, so academics who study generations, and they've said that our ability to live longer and to possess power longer. So if you look at what's happening in the White House or in Congress or in the Senate, and you see people living longer, possessing that power longer, it actually has a ripple effect on all the other generations and those values that they would bring if they were holding seats of power.
Mm.
So in other societies or in other, even organizations, you're basically forced to become a mentor of the tribe or something like that, but you don't hold on and retain that power. And that allows that next generation to have a voice, to have their opinions heard. And also, people in their 60s have a lot of wisdom, right? That is their prime time to express it. So our inability, and Scott Galloway does a great job. He talks about this a lot, but our inability to transfer those seats and positions of power can actually prevent our society from progressing in the way in which we might need to do it. And according to all the challenges that we face, whether it's AI or all the multitude of things, like you just coming at it a different perspective is going to be helpful.
I could talk to you for hours about this stuff.
Yeah, me too.
What is something where you're seeing in your research, or maybe you're seeing in research of that's out there that maybe is more on the hopeful side? Is there anything that you can share that's positive? Where is there some hope?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that we're finding a lot of hope in, and I think people found a lot of hope in last summer, we expect it to continue, is the trend of people supporting women-based economics. And those are both men and women supporting that. So for example, 80% of Gen Z and millennials say women supporting women is a key economic trend fueling today's economy. There's been all these research to show like the impact of the Taylor Swift effect or the Beyonce effect. But we also see 74% of Gen Z and millennials are interested in more experiences that are centered around women's interests, outlooks, and communities. So sports, what the Olympics is going to look like this summer, and just that intentionality about how women create experiences that are inclusive, that feel great, that transport us into different places. There is something that the world really wants to see and is willing to support and willing to put economic firepower behind. And I am so excited about that. In our research, we call it the Care Bear stare, because I think about it as like women putting out their rainbows of stare power, and then people appreciating that, loving that, and supporting it with their wallets and their dollars. So I'm really excited to see where that takes us, and how that moves from the big players like a Taylor Swift and a Beyonce out to everyone, and to movements like women everywhere watch sports, or everyone watches women's sports, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
Those are big movements that are happening, and I'm excited to see where they continue to take us.
Well, Libby Rodney, thank you so much for
Thank you
spending
so
this
much.
time with us. You have such a wealth of knowledge just based on where you sit and what you do day to day. Is there a good place for people to follow you or follow the work that you're doing if they'd like to do that?
Yes, thank you so much for asking that question. I am on LinkedIn. That's where I post a lot, but I do have a Substack called The Next Big Think. And once a week, we'll cover a piece of research that is just meant to make you think differently and to showcase where society is headed in the next 12 to 36 months.
Well, I'm going to go check that out too.
Okay,
Libby,
great.
thank you
Please.
so much for
Thank you so
spending this
much.
time.
I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you're an influencer or a brand that wants to work with us, please feel free to email us at info@shespeaks.com. Until next time.